The grandfather clock in Ashford Manor's entrance hall struck 9, its brass pendulum cutting through silence thick enough to choke on. Elira Ashbourne stood at her bedroom window, watching snow accumulate on the frozen gardens below, each flake another layer of numbness settling over her life. 7 years. 7 winters. 7 versions of herself, each smaller than the last. Her breath fogged the glass. She didn't wipe it away. There was something fitting about the blur. Everything in this house existed behind a veil of distance, including her. "Your Grace, shall I prepare your evening tea?" Martha's voice came soft from the doorway, the way everyone spoke to Elira as if she might shatter from ordinary volume. "No, thank you." Elira's reflection smiled in the window, a practiced curve that never reached her eyes. "I'm not thirsty." "You said that at breakfast." "And lunch." Martha moved closer, her worn hands wringing the edge of her apron. 20 years she'd served the Ashbourne family, and her loyalty ran deeper than protocol. "My lady, you're disappearing." "I'm right here." "Are you?" Elira turned then, and Martha's breath caught. Even in the lamplight, the Duchess looked like watercolor left in the rain. Beautiful, yes, but bleeding at the edges, losing definition. Her dark hair was perfectly arranged, her posture flawless, her dove-gray dress immaculate. Everything correct, everything hollow. "I'm tired, Martha. That's all." "You're always tired. You're 26 years old, and you move like a woman twice that." Martha stepped forward, breaking a dozen unspoken rules. "When did you last laugh? When did you last raise your voice? When did you last do anything that wasn't designed to make yourself smaller?" Elira's throat tightened. "This is who I need to be." "This is who you think you need to be. There's a difference." Before Elira could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor, measured, precise, unmistakable. Both women froze. Martha dropped into a curtsy and hurried out, leaving Elira alone as the footsteps passed her door without slowing. Dorian. Her husband's rooms were 3 doors down. He might as well have been in another country. She pressed her palm against the door after he passed, feeling the wood's grain beneath her fingers. Once, years ago, she'd almost knocked, almost broken the silence, almost asked him why he looked at her like she was a mistake he couldn't correct. She dropped her hand before her knuckles touched wood. That moment of cowardice had calcified into their marriage, a thing of separate bedrooms, formal greetings, and careful distance. They were strangers who shared a name, nothing more. Elira returned to the window. Below, a carriage pulled up to the manor's entrance, its lanterns cutting through the dark. She watched a man emerge, tall and broad-shouldered, shaking snow from his coat with easy confidence. Even from this distance, she could see he moved differently than Dorian. Looser, warmer, more alive. Her pulse kicked up without permission. Lucien Ashbourne. The estranged brother. The one who'd left England 7 years ago under a cloud of scandal and hadn't been heard from since. Until now. Downstairs, the household erupted into controlled chaos. Mrs. Hallowell, the housekeeper, barked orders while footmen scrambled. The arrival was unexpected. Unannounced, unplanned, unwelcome. In a house that ran on rigid schedules, spontaneity was a crime. Elira descended the stairs slowly, one hand trailing the banister. She'd learned to move through this house like water, present but unremarkable, seen but not noticed. It was safer that way. The entrance hall buzzed with servants. Through the crowd, she caught glimpses of Lucien, laughing, actually laughing, as he handed his coat to a flustered maid. His hair was longer than fashion dictated, sun-streaked despite the season, and his face carried lines that came from smiling, not frowning. He was everything Dorian wasn't. "Is that really you under all that propriety, Elira?" His voice cut through the noise, warm and direct. Everyone stopped. Servants didn't pause in the middle of tasks. Clocks didn't skip ticks. But everything halted as Lucien crossed the entrance hall and stood before her, grinning like they were old friends. They'd met exactly twice, both times at her wedding. "Mr. Ashbourne," she curtsied, perfect and automatic. "Welcome home." "God, don't do that." He caught her hand before she could complete the gesture, pulling her upright. His grip was warm, calloused, real. "We're family, aren't we? Technically?" Technically, the word stung more than it should. "Lucien." Dorian's voice dropped the temperature 10 degrees. He stood at the top of the stairs, perfectly composed in evening dress, his face carved from ice. You should have written ahead. Where's the fun in that? Lucien didn't release Elira's hand. Besides, I wanted to surprise everyone, especially you, brother. The tension stretched. Elira felt it in her chest, tight and uncomfortable. She tried to pull her hand away, but Lucien held on, his thumb brushing her knuckles, a small rebellion that felt enormous. We weren't expecting guests, Dorian said, descending with measured steps. Christmas preparations are already underway. Perfect. I love Christmas. Lucien finally released Elira, but his attention stayed on her, curious and unsettling. How long has it been? 7 years? You were barely more than a girl at the wedding. I'm not anymore. The words surprised everyone, including Elira. She rarely spoke without being directly addressed, and never with that edge of something sharp beneath the courtesy. Lucien's grin widened. No, you're certainly not. Your rooms will need to be prepared. Dorian had reached them now, inserting himself between his wife and his brother with practiced subtlety. Mrs. Hallowell, see to it. Already done, Your Grace? The housekeeper appeared at his elbow, efficient as always. The West Wing guest suite. The West Wing? Lucien raised an eyebrow. That's practically a different house. We value privacy, Dorian said. Clearly. The word hung in the air, loaded with meaning Elira didn't fully understand. Lucien looked between them. Dorian rigid and controlled, Elira silent and still. And something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or pity. She hated both options equally. Well, Lucien clapped his hands together, breaking the moment. I'm starving. Is dinner still at 8 in this mausoleum, or have you loosened up since I left? We maintain proper schedules. Dorian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Dinner is at 8, sharp. Wouldn't dream of being late. Lucien bowed to Elira, the gesture somehow both mocking and genuine. Looking forward to getting to know you properly, Your Grace. He left then, following a footman toward the West Wing, his laughter echoing in the stone corridors. The sound felt foreign here, like birdsong in winter. Dorian turned to Elira. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, she thought she saw something crack in his careful composure. But then it was gone, smoothed over like snow-covering tracks. You should rest before dinner, he said. I'm not tired. Nevertheless, it wasn't a suggestion. It never was. Elira climbed the stairs alone, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back. When she reached the landing, she glanced down. Dorian stood exactly where she'd left him, staring at the spot Lucien had occupied, his hands clenched at his sides. She'd never seen him clench his hands before. Boshik. Dinner was a masterpiece of discomfort. The dining room could seat 40. Tonight it held 3. Dorian at the head, Elira to his right, Lucien across from her. Candlelight flickered across polished silver and china so fine it was nearly transparent. 7 courses spread over 2 hours, each one announced by servants who materialized and vanished like ghosts. So, Lucien attacked his venison with enthusiasm. What do you do with yourself all day, Elira? Run the household? Manage the estates? Plot elaborate revenge against your enemies? She nearly choked on her wine. Dorian's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I manage correspondence. Oversee the household accounts. Ensure the staff. Sounds thrilling. It's necessary. Necessary. Lucien leaned back, studying her. What do you do that's unnecessary? What do you do just because you want to? The question landed like a stone in still water. Want. When had she last considered what she wanted? I read, she said finally. What do you read? Novels, mostly. Poetry sometimes. What kind of novels? Lucien. Dorian's voice carried a warning. My wife's reading habits are hardly dinner conversation. Why not? What else should we talk about? The weather? It's snowing. There. Done. Elira bit her lip to hide a smile. She shouldn't encourage this. She shouldn't find his irreverence refreshing. She shouldn't enjoy the way he looked at her like she was a person instead of a portrait. I read adventure stories, she said quietly. Travel narratives. Accounts of places I'll never see. Why won't you see them? Because I'm trapped. Because my life was decided before I understood I had a choice. Because the man I married can barely stand to look at me. Because my responsibilities are here, she said instead. Responsibilities. Lucian repeated the word like it tasted bad. Do you ever get tired of being responsible? That's enough. Dorian set down his fork with precision. My wife's conduct is beyond reproach. She understands her duties. I'm sure she does. But does she understand anything else? Meaning, Lucien leaned forward, his easy smile fading. Meaning, I've been here 3 hours and I've watched you speak to her exactly twice. Meaning, she flinches when you look at her. Meaning, this house feels like a beautiful tomb and everyone in it is slowly suffocating. Silence crashed down. Alira's heart hammered against her ribs. No one spoke to Dorian Ashbourne like that. No one questioned him, challenged him, called him out on the careful cruelty of his distance. Dorian stood. You forget yourself. No, brother, you've forgotten yourself. And her. Lucien gestured to Alira. When did you last have a real conversation with your wife? When did you last ask her opinion on anything that matters? When did you last... My marriage is not your concern. Then whose concern is it? Because from where I'm sitting, nobody seems concerned at all. Dorian's composure finally cracked. Color rose in his cheeks, his shoulders tensed, his hands, those carefully controlled hands, curled into fists. Alira had never seen him angry. She'd never seen him feel anything. You left, Dorian said, his voice low and dangerous. You abandoned your responsibilities, your family, your name. You have no right to return and pass judgment on choices you know nothing about. I know what I see. You see what you want to see. You always did. And you see nothing at all. They faced each other across the table, 7 years of unspoken history crackling between them. Alira sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid this fragile moment would shatter and bury her in the debris. I think... Her voice came out smaller than intended. She tried again. I think I'll retire early. Both men turned to her, startled, as if they'd forgotten she existed. The look on Dorian's face, brief, unguarded, carved something painful in her chest. Not anger, shame. He looked ashamed. Alira, he started. Good night. She stood, her chair scraping against marble. Welcome home, Lucien. I hope you'll be comfortable. She walked out with her head high and her hands steady, maintaining perfect composure until she reached the hallway. Then she ran. Her footsteps echoed through empty corridors, past portraits of dead Ashbournes who'd surely handled their marriages better, past doors that led to rooms she'd never entered, past the life she'd imagined she might have once, before she understood how thoroughly she'd miscalculated. She reached her bedroom and locked the door, leaning against it, finally allowing herself to shake. 7 years of careful neutrality demolished in one dinner. 7 years of pretending she didn't mind the distance, the silence, the careful way Dorian edited her out of his life. 7 years of convincing herself this was enough. Martha had asked when she'd last laughed. The answer was her wedding day, before she'd understood what she'd agreed to, before she'd realized the man who'd seemed so composed and capable was actually frozen solid, and she'd bound herself to winter incarnate. A knock startled her. Alira? Lucian's voice. Not Dorian's. Of course not Dorian's. I'm fine, she called through the door. No, you're not. Can I come in? That wouldn't be appropriate. Appropriate. He laughed, but it sounded sad. Everything in this house is appropriate. Everything is correct. Everything is absolutely miserable. She should send him away. She should maintain proper distance. She should be the perfect duchess everyone expected. She opened the door. Lucian stood in the hallway, his cravat loosened, his expression gentle. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed like that. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I came back expecting things to be the same as I remembered. But you weren't here then. And now you are, and you're clearly unhappy, and my brother is clearly an idiot, and I have no right to insert myself into your marriage, but why did you leave? The question escaped before she could stop it. 7 years ago. Everyone says there was a scandal, but nobody explains what happened. Lucien's jaw tightened. I fell in love with someone inappropriate. Dorian tried to fix it, tried to manage it, tried to control who I was and what I felt. When I refused to comply, he gave me a choice, conform or leave. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I left. Do you regret it? Every day, and not at all. He studied her carefully. What about you? Do you regret marrying him? The honest answer would destroy her. The polite answer would be a lie. I regret who I've become, she said finally. I regret shrinking myself to fit into a space that was never meant for me. I regret believing that if I was just perfect enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough, he might eventually see me as something other than an obligation. He's a fool. He's a duke. He needs a wife who fits the role, not one who wants... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Wants what? To matter, to be chosen, to be loved. It doesn't matter what I want. It should. Lucien reached out like he might touch her arm, then thought better of it. You deserve better than this. This is what I agreed to. You were 19. What did you know about agreeing to anything? Everything. Nothing. She'd been so certain, so naive, so convinced that affection would grow from proximity. She'd believed in the fairy tale. Marry the handsome duke, live in the grand estate, find happiness in duty and position. Nobody had warned her that duty could be a prison. That position could be a cage. That you could live beside someone for 7 years and remain complete strangers. Thank you, she said softly, for noticing. How could I not notice? You're the most visible, invisible person I've ever met. The observation was so accurate it hurt. She was always present, always correct, always dutiful, and completely unseen. I should sleep, she said. Will you? No. She'd lie awake, replaying the dinner, analyzing every word, wondering what Dorian thought when he looked at her across that table, wondering if he thought anything at all. Good night, Lucien. He bowed, proper this time, and left her alone with her thoughts and the growing suspicion that his return had changed something fundamental, cracked something open, let in light that hurt to look at. She prepared for bed mechanically, dismissing Martha's help. The silk nightgown slid over her skin like water. She braided her hair with practiced efficiency. She climbed into the massive 4-poster bed that had belonged to Ashbourne duchesses for generations. The mattress was expensive. The linens were exquisite. The pillows were perfect. And she was completely, utterly alone. 3 doors down, Dorian sat in his study, staring at a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. The fire burned low. The clock ticked. The silence pressed against his ears until he wanted to shout just to hear something break it. Lucien was right. God help him. His irresponsible, reckless brother was absolutely right. When had he last spoken to Alira about anything that mattered? When had he last asked her opinion, her preference, her thoughts? When had he last looked at her and really seen the woman behind the perfect manners? He'd convinced himself the distance was necessary, that maintaining proper separation would prevent the disaster he'd witnessed in his parents' marriage, passion that curdled into resentment, love that twisted into cruelty. He'd chosen control over chaos, duty over desire. He'd chosen wrong, but changing course now felt impossible. 7 years of careful distance couldn't be undone with an apology. 7 years of treating her like a responsibility instead of a person couldn't be erased with sudden attention. And yet, her voice at dinner, I read adventure stories, travel narratives, accounts of places I'll never see. The longing beneath those words had cut him. She'd been living in his house, sleeping 3 doors down, existing in permanent exile from her own dreams, and he'd never once asked what she wanted beyond her duties. He'd never once treated her like someone whose wants mattered. The scotch disappeared in one burning swallow. Another followed, then another, until the edges of his control softened and something dangerously close to feeling leaked through. He stood, walked to his door, stood in the hallway staring at her closed door 3 paces away. Knocked? Said what? Apologized for 7 years of benign neglect? Explained that he'd been so focused on not becoming his father that he'd become something worse, absent, cold, empty. His hand lifted, lowered, lifted again. The clock struck midnight. He returned to his room and closed the door, hating himself a little more than usual. Neither of them slept that night. 3 doors apart, they lay awake in expensive beds, trapped in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside and felt like drowning from within. Tomorrow guests would begin arriving for Christmas. The house would fill with obligations and expectations. The performance would continue. But something had shifted. Something had cracked. And neither of them knew if that crack would let in light or simply allow everything to finally, completely fall apart. Morning broke gray and reluctant, as if the sun itself couldn't muster enthusiasm for another day at Ashford Manor. Alira woke with her face pressed into the pillow, her braid a tangled mess, and the distinct feeling that she'd spent the night fighting battles in her sleep. Martha entered without knocking, a privilege earned through 2 decades of service and genuine affection. She carried a breakfast tray that Alira wouldn't touch and concerned she couldn't quite hide. "The first guests arrive at noon," Martha said, setting the tray on the writing desk. "Lady Pemberton and her daughters. Then Lord and Lady Hartwick. By evening, the house will be full." "How lovely." Alira's voice came out flat. "You could try to sound convinced." "I'm too tired to pretend this early." Martha sat on the edge of the bed, another breach of protocol that spoke volumes about their relationship. "What happened at dinner?" Lucienne asked questions. "What kind of questions?" "The kind nobody asks. The kind that require honest answers." Alira finally sat up, shoving hair out of her face. "He wanted to know what I do for myself. What I want." "And what did you say?" "Nothing true." She picked at the embroidered coverlet, following a vine pattern with her fingernail. "I told him I read. I didn't tell him that sometimes I read the same page 5 times because I can't concentrate, that I've started 3 different journals and abandoned them all because writing down how I feel makes it too real." "What do you feel?" The question hung there, simple and impossible. "Like I'm disappearing," Alira said finally. "Like every day I become a little less substantial, until one morning I'll wake up and be completely transparent. Everyone will look right through me because there's nothing left to see." Martha's hand found hers, warm and solid. "You're still here." "Am I?" "Sometimes I wonder." Voices drifted up from the entrance hall, servants preparing for the onslaught of guests, orders being called, furniture being rearranged, the machine of hospitality grinding into motion, and Alira was expected to be its gracious, smiling face. "I should dress," she said. "You should eat." "I'm not hungry." "You're never hungry. You're wasting away." "Good. Maybe if I get small enough, I'll finally fit." The bitterness in her own voice startled her. Martha's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more determined. "Listen to me." She gripped Alira's hand tighter. "I watched the last Duchess waste herself trying to please a man who didn't know how to be pleased. I watched her shrink and fade until there was nothing left but duty and disappointment. I won't watch it happen again." "What choice do I have?" "You always have a choice. Maybe not a good one, maybe not an easy one, but a choice nonetheless." Before Alira could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Not Martha's familiar tap, not the servant's discreet scratch. This was formal, deliberate. "Your Grace?" Mrs. Hallowell's voice carried through the wood. "The Duke requests your presence in his study at your earliest convenience." Martha and Alira exchanged glances. Dorian never requested her presence. They operated in parallel orbits, carefully calibrated to never actually collide. "Tell him I'll be down shortly," Alira called. Mrs. Hallowell's footsteps retreated. Martha stood, already moving toward the wardrobe with the efficiency of long practice. "The blue morning dress," she said. "It brings out your eyes." "He won't notice." "Then wear it for yourself." 20 minutes later, Alira descended the stairs in pale blue silk, her hair properly arranged, her mask firmly in place. The study door stood ajar, unusual, since Dorian typically kept it closed against intrusion. She knocked anyway. "Come in." His voice sounded different, rougher, tired. The study was Dorian's domain, all dark wood and leather, books lining every wall in precise alphabetical order. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, silhouetted against the gray morning light. He didn't turn when she entered. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. "I owe you an apology." The words were so unexpected that for a moment she thought she'd misheard. Dorian didn't apologize. Dukes didn't apologize. The natural order didn't allow for it. "For what?" Her voice came out smaller than intended. "Last night, the dinner. Lucienne was inappropriate, and she should have managed the situation better. He turned then, and she saw the shadows under his eyes, the tight set of his jaw. He looked like he'd slept as poorly as she had. You shouldn't have been subjected to that discomfort. There it was. The apology that wasn't really an apology at all. Sorry you were uncomfortable. Not sorry for the 7 years of careful distance that made the discomfort possible. It's fine, she said automatically. It's not fine. Nothing about this is fine. The admission stopped her breath. Dorian never acknowledged imperfection, never admitted fault, never let the mask slip far enough to reveal anything real beneath. I don't understand, she said carefully. He moved away from the window, closer to her, and she fought the urge to step back. This proximity felt dangerous, unfamiliar. They'd perfected the art of occupying the same space while maintaining maximum distance. We have guests arriving in a few hours, he said. Over the next week, this house will be full of people watching us, judging us, measuring us against some impossible standard of aristocratic perfection. We're quite good at that performance. Yes, we are. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. Too good. We've performed so well for so long that I'm not sure either of us remembers what's real anymore. Illyra's pulse kicked up, a rabbit-quick flutter in her throat. This conversation felt like walking on ice, every word a potential crack that could send her plunging into freezing water. What are you saying? I'm saying... He stopped, frustration tightening his shoulders. I'm saying that Lucien was right. About the house. About us. About the fact that we've built something perfectly correct and completely empty. You've never cared about that before. I've always cared. I've just been very skilled at pretending I don't. The honesty carved something open in her chest. She wanted to be angry, wanted to throw 7 years of careful silence back in his face. But anger required energy she didn't have. And besides, what would it change? They'd still be trapped in this beautiful prison, still bound by expectations neither of them had chosen. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because in 3 hours, Lady Pemberton will arrive with her daughters, and she'll watch us like a hawk, looking for cracks. Because Lord Hartwick will make pointed comments about duty and lineage. Because the Thorntons will whisper about why we have no children yet. And the Ashbys will speculate about our marriage. And everyone will judge whether we're upholding the family name properly. And we'll smile and nod and play our parts perfectly. We always do. What if I don't want to anymore? The question landed between them like a stone thrown through glass. Illyra stared at him, searching his face for some sign that she'd misunderstood, that he was testing her, that this was another elaborate form of control. But his expression held only exhaustion and something that might have been honesty. What do you want instead? She asked. I don't know, something real, something that doesn't feel like slow suffocation. The irony almost made her laugh. You've spent 7 years building this suffocation. You set the rules, you established the distance, you made it perfectly clear that our marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. I know. You don't get to change your mind now because your brother called you out at dinner. I know that too. They stood facing each other across an invisible chasm that felt wider than the physical space between them. 7 years of unspoken resentment, unmet needs, unacknowledged loneliness. You couldn't bridge that gap with one uncomfortable conversation. The guests are arriving, Illyra said finally. We should prepare. Illyra, we're very good at performing, remember? Let's do what we do best. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. I notice you, you know. I've always noticed you. She looked back and the expression on his face sent her heart into a confused spiral. Then why? The question caught in her throat. Why the distance? Why the coldness? Why treat her like an obligation instead of a person? Because noticing you made everything harder, he said quietly. Because every time I looked at you, I remembered what I'd trapped you in, what I'd trapped us both in, and it was easier to look away than to acknowledge my failure. The confession should have satisfied something in her, should have eased the constant ache of being invisible. Instead, it just made everything hurt more. I need to go, she whispered. This time he didn't stop her. She made it halfway down the corridor before her legs gave out. She pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. Dorian never spoke like that, never admitted vulnerability, never let the perfect ducal facade crack enough to reveal the person underneath. You look like you've seen a ghost. Lucien's voice made her jump. He leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. How long have you been standing there? Long enough to know you just had a very interesting conversation with my brother. You were eavesdropping? I was passing by. The fact that the door was open and voices carry is hardly my fault. He pushed off the wall, moving closer. He actually apologized? After a fashion. That must have been strange. Everything is strange. You've been back less than a day, and already the whole house feels different. Good different or bad different? She didn't have an answer. The change felt too new, too raw, like a wound that hadn't decided whether to heal or fester. Carriage coming up the drive, Lucian said, glancing toward a window. Your adoring public awaits. Alira straightened, smoothing her dress, rebuilding her composure brick by careful brick. She could fall apart later. Right now, she had a role to play. How do I look? She asked, like a woman about to smile so hard her face might crack. Perfect. That's exactly the look I'm going for. They walked together toward the entrance hall, and Alira tried not to notice how different it felt to have someone beside her instead of 3 paces ahead or behind. Tried not to acknowledge how Lucien's presence made her stand a little straighter, feel a little more real. The first carriage rolled to a stop just as they reached the entrance. Lady Pemberton emerged in a flurry of fur and fabric, her 3 daughters cascading out behind her like pastel confections. Your Grace! Lady Pemberton's voice could crack crystal at 20 paces. How wonderful to see you looking so well. And is that Lucien Ashbourne? My word, we thought you'd disappeared forever. Just traveling, Lady Pemberton. Building character, as they say. Character is built at home through proper discipline, young man. She sailed past him toward Alira, her daughters forming a giggling wall behind her. Where's your husband? Surely the Duke should be greeting his guests personally. He's attending to estate business, Alira said smoothly. He'll join us shortly. Estate business on the day guests arrive? How very dedicated. The words dripped with implication that Dorian was either extraordinarily dutiful or deliberately avoiding his social obligations. Both were true, in different ways. The Pembertons swept inside, filling the entrance hall with chatter and the scent of expensive perfume. The daughters, Clarissa, Beatrice, and Henrietta, ranged from 19 to 23, all blonde, all pretty, all aggressively looking for husbands. Their eyes landed on Lucien with the precision of hawks spotting prey. Mr. Ashbourne, Clarissa the eldest, batted her eyelashes with enough force to generate a breeze. How exciting that you've returned for Christmas. Will you be staying long? That depends on how entertaining things become. Oh, I'm sure we can provide adequate entertainment, Beatrice added, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Alira watched the performance with detached fascination. This was the game. Young women angling for advantageous marriages, mothers strategizing like generals, everyone playing their parts in an elaborate dance of breeding and position. She'd been one of those girls once. Young, hopeful, naive enough to think that marriage to a duke meant something beyond a title and an empty bed. More carriages arrived throughout the afternoon. Lord and Lady Hartwick, elderly and proper, radiating disapproval like heat from a stove. The Thorntons, middle-aged and gossipy, their eyes cataloging every detail for later dissection. The Ashbys, sophisticated and cold, treating the whole gathering like an anthropological study. By 4 o'clock, the manor teemed with guests, their voices bouncing off marble and crystal, filling the silence Alira had grown accustomed to with noise that somehow felt lonelier. Dorian materialized for tea, perfectly composed, giving no indication of their earlier conversation. He greeted guests with practiced warmth, fielded questions about the estate with easy competence, and managed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. He didn't look at Alira once. She poured tea and made pleasant conversation and smiled until her cheeks ached, performing her role so perfectly that no one could possibly see the person beneath the Duchess. Except Lucien, who kept catching her eye across the room with expressions that ranged from amused to concerned to something else she couldn't quite name. Your Grace, Mrs. Thornton cornered her by the refreshment table, her voice pitched to Carrie. You must be so thrilled to have a full house for Christmas, and perhaps this year there will be even more to celebrate? The implication hung there, heavy and invasive. When are you going to produce an heir? We're grateful for the company, Alira said carefully. Of course. Though I must say, 7 years is quite a long time without expansion to the family. In my day, Duchesses understood their primary duty. The words hit like a slap. Elira's fingers tightened around her teacup, the only outward sign of distress. In your day, Lucien appeared at her elbow, his smile dangerous. Duchesses also understood that personal matters weren't suitable for public speculation. Funny how standards change. Mrs. Thornton's face flushed purple. I was merely making an observation? How kind. Allow me to make one as well. That dress is absolutely fascinating, very bold, for your age. The woman sputtered, torn between outrage and the inability to directly challenge an Ashbourne. She retreated with wounded dignity, leaving Lucien and Elira alone in a bubble of shocked silence. You can't say things like that, Elira whispered, fighting a smile. I just did. Someone needed to. She'll tell everyone. It will be all over London by New Year. Good. Maybe they'll think twice before ambushing you with invasive questions. You don't understand how this works. There are rules. The rules are designed to keep people like you quiet and people like her comfortable. He handed her a fresh cup of tea, their fingers brushing briefly. What's the point of rules that only protect bullies? She had no answer for that. The rules had always existed, immutable as gravity. You didn't question them any more than you questioned breathing. Dinner that evening was a production. 24 people around the massive dining table, crystal gleaming, silver polished to mirrors. Each course a masterpiece of culinary excess. Elira sat at Dorian's right, exactly where a duchess belonged, making conversation with Lord Hartwick about sheep breeding while her mind wandered to everything and nothing. Across the table, Lucien entertained the Pemberton daughters with travel stories that were probably half fiction. Beside her, Dorian discussed politics with Lord Ashby in the measured tones of men who found passion distasteful. The noise was overwhelming, laughter, argument, the clink of cutlery on china, but somehow Elira felt more isolated than when the house stood silent. The Duchess seems tired, Lady Hartwick observed loudly enough for half the table to hear. Perhaps the strain of hosting is too much. Perhaps the strain of enduring your company is too much, Lucien said cheerfully. Shocked silence. Then, unexpectedly, Lord Ashby laughed. The boy has a point, Millicent. You do run rather intense. The tension broke. Conversation resumed, slightly more cautious around Lucien's unpredictable contributions. Elira caught Dorian's eye for just a moment, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, that his brother was both a disaster and a relief. After dinner, the women retired to the drawing room while the men disappeared into clouds of cigar smoke and brandy. Elira found herself trapped on a settee between Lady Pemberton and Mrs. Thornton, both determined to dissect her marriage with surgical precision. Of course, we all understand these things take time, Lady Pemberton said with false sympathy, but 7 years is beginning to look less like patience and more like difficulty. There's no difficulty, Elira said firmly. Then perhaps the Duke is spending his attentions elsewhere, Mrs. Thornton suggested with venomous sweetness. Men do have needs, after all, and if a wife doesn't fulfill them, my brother is the most faithful boor you'll ever meet. Lucien's voice cut through the room. He leaned against the doorframe, breaking the sacred separation of the sexes after dinner with typical disregard for propriety. Trust me, if Dorian had a mistress, I'd know. And laugh. Extensively. Mr. Ashbourne, Lady Pemberton drew herself up like an offended pigeon. This conversation is not appropriate for mixed company. Neither is speculating about my sister-in-law's fertility, yet here we are. Sister-in-law. He said it with such casual possession that it almost sounded true, as if Elira was his family in some real way, not just a woman who'd married his brother and existed in parallel silence. The drawing room fell into uncomfortable quiet. The Pemberton daughters whispered behind their fans. Lady Hartwick looked scandalized. Mrs. Ashby appeared entertained by the whole catastrophe. Perhaps we should have music, Elira suggested desperately. Clarissa, I understand you play beautifully. The evening limped forward with pianoforte performances of varying quality and conversation that studiously avoided any topic more controversial than the weather. By 10 o'clock, Elira's face hurt from smiling, her back ached from perfect posture, and her patience had worn to a thread. I'm retiring, she announced to no one in particular. The women made appropriate noises. The men, filtering back in from their cigars, barely noticed. She slipped out and climbed the stairs, each step feeling like escape from a battlefield. Martha waited in her room, already preparing the bed, her expression knowing. That bad? Worse. Alira sank onto the dressing table chair. Mrs. Thornton asked if Dorian has a mistress. Lady Pemberton implied I'm barren. And Lucian defended me so aggressively that everyone will be whispering about inappropriate attachments by morning. Are there inappropriate attachments? Of course not. He's just being kind. Kindness from a man toward a neglected woman often looks like something else to jealous observers. Alira met Martha's eyes in the mirror. I'm not neglected. I'm married. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. The word settled into her bones, heavy and true. She was married. She was also profoundly, devastatingly alone. The two facts existed simultaneously without contradiction. Martha helped her undress in silence, unlacing the gown, unpinning her hair, all the rituals of transformation from duchess to woman. When Alira finally climbed into bed, still wearing the day's exhaustion like a second skin, Martha paused at the door. He watched you at dinner, she said quietly. The Duke. Every time you weren't looking, he watched you. Who? Dorian? Who else? Then she was gone, leaving Alira alone with that information and no idea what to do with it. She lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around her. Footsteps in the hallway as guests found their rooms. Distant laughter from somewhere below. The wind picking up outside, rattling windows in their frames. 3 doors down, a floorboard creaked. She held her breath, listening. Another creak, closer to her door. Then silence. He was standing there, in the hallway, outside her room. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She waited for the knock that didn't come, for the conversation they still needed to have, for something to bridge the impossible distance between them. The floorboard creaked again, moving away. His door opened and closed. The almost moment passed, leaving her more alone than before. She must have slept eventually, because she woke to gray dawn light, and Martha shaking her shoulder with unusual urgency. What is it? You need to come downstairs, now. What happened? Just come. Alira threw on a dressing gown and followed Martha down, her mind spinning through possibilities. Fire? Theft? Someone ill? Dead? The entrance hall held a small crowd. Dorian, Lucian, Mrs. Hallowell, and several footmen all staring at the front doors, which stood wide open to the freezing morning. Snow had blown in, creating small drifts on the marble. But that wasn't what held everyone's attention. In the center of the entrance hall, someone had built a snowman. Inside the house, a perfectly constructed snowman with coal eyes and a carrot nose, wearing one of Dorian's top hats and one of Alira's scarves. What on earth? She started. The Pemberton girls, Mrs. Hallowell said grimly. They thought it would be amusing, a midnight adventure. They broke into the Duke's personal rooms to steal his hat. Dorian's voice was carefully controlled, which meant he was furious. And your chambers for the scarf. Alira looked at the snowman, then at Dorian, then at the open doors letting winter into the carefully controlled perfection of Ashford Manor, and she started laughing. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, unstoppable, slightly hysterical. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until her sides ached, until everyone stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Maybe 7 years of perfect control had finally broken under the weight of a snowman in a top hat. Alira. Dorian reached for her. It's perfect, she gasped between laughs. It's absolutely perfect. We spend all our time maintaining appearances, preserving dignity, following rules, and 3 silly girls build a snowman in our entrance hall. They just did it, without asking permission, without worrying about consequences. They'll be sent home immediately, Mrs. Hallowell said. No! The word came out firm, surprising everyone, including Alira herself. No, they won't. They're young and thoughtless, but they're not malicious. And honestly, this is the most interesting thing that's happened in this house in years. Interesting, Dorian repeated flatly. They violated our privacy. So did Mrs. Thornton when she asked about your mistress. So does everyone when they speculate about why we have no children. At least the girls were creative about it. She walked forward and adjusted the scarf around the snowman's neck, smoothing the fabric with gentle fingers. Dorian's hat sat at a jaunty angle. The whole thing was ridiculous and wonderful and completely inappropriate. Leave it, she said, until it melts. Let everyone see it. Let them wonder what kind of household allows snowmen in the entrance hall. Elira, that's not reasonable, proper, expected. She turned to face him, still smiling. When has any of this been about what's expected? They've broken the rules. Let's enjoy it while it lasts. For a long moment, Dorian just stared at her. Then, incredibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to count as revolutionary. Close the doors, he told the footman. Leave the snow sculpture. We'll deal with it later. Lucien's laugh echoed through the hall. I knew I liked those Pemberton girls. The staff dispersed, shooting curious glances at the snowman and their suddenly unpredictable duchess. Elira stood in the center of the entrance hall, her dressing gown inadequate against the cold, feeling more awake than she had in months. That was unexpected, Dorian said quietly. Which part? The snowman or my reaction to it? Both. She looked at him directly, holding his gaze for longer than usual. Maybe unexpected isn't always bad. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. They stood there while melting snow dripped onto marble and dawn light crept through windows, and for just a moment the careful distance between them didn't feel quite so absolute. Then guests began stirring upstairs and the moment fractured. Elira retreated to her room to dress properly. The day ahead would be full of apologies and explanations, gossip and speculation. But as she climbed the stairs, she could have sworn she heard Dorian laugh, a quiet, rusty sound, like a door opening after years of being locked. The snowman melted slowly throughout the day, leaving a puddle and a pile of accessories as its legacy. The Pemberton girls apologized with genuine mortification. The other guests found the whole incident either scandalous or hilarious, depending on their disposition. And Elira moved through it all with something that felt dangerously close to hope beginning to bloom in the frozen garden of her chest. The change was subtle at first, like the way snow accumulates, imperceptible in any single moment, but undeniable when you finally look up and realize the world has transformed. Over the next 3 days, Dorian started appearing in places he'd never been before. Not dramatically, not with announcement or explanation, just there. In the library when Elira was reading, in the conservatory when she was checking on the winter plants, at breakfast, actually sitting at the table instead of taking a tray in his study. He didn't always speak. Sometimes he just occupied the same space, reading his own book, attending to correspondence, existing in proximity. The silence between them began to feel less like absence and more like something that might eventually become conversation. It unsettled her more than 7 years of distance ever had. You're staring at him, Lucian murmured during tea on the third afternoon. Elira jerked her attention back to her cup. Across the room, Dorian stood with Lord Ashby, discussing something about agricultural reform with the enthusiasm of a man being slowly buried alive. I'm not staring. You are. And he keeps looking at you when you're not looking at him. It's very circular, also very obvious. There's nothing to be obvious about. Right. Nothing except the fact that your husband has apparently decided to acknowledge your existence after 7 years of practiced ignorance. That's completely unremarkable. Elira set down her cup before her trembling hands could betray her. He's just being present for the guests. He's being present for you. Lucian leaned closer, his voice dropping. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. There's nothing to do. There's always something to do. You could talk to him. Actually talk. Not just exchange pleasantries about the weather and whether the roast was adequate. And say what? Thank you for finally noticing I exist? I'm sorry I'm not worth more than a belated effort brought on by your brother's criticism? The bitterness came out sharper than intended. Lucien's expression softened into something dangerously close to pity. He's trying, Lucian said. 7 years too late. Maybe. But he's still trying. That has to count for something. Did it? Could 3 days of proximity erase 7 years of absence? Could sitting in the same room occasionally compensate for all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering what she'd done wrong, how she'd failed, why she wasn't enough? I need air, Elira said abruptly. She escaped before Lucian could respond, slipping out of the drawing room and through corridors until she reached the conservatory. The glass-walled room overlooked the frozen gardens, filled with plants that somehow survived the winter through careful temperature control and obsessive maintenance. She understood those plants, understood what it took to survive in an environment that should kill you. I thought I might find you here. She didn't turn around. Dorian's reflection appeared in the glass beside hers, both of them ghostly and insubstantial. Did you need something? She asked. No, You left rather quickly. I needed air. In the conservatory? It's quiet here. Yes. He moved closer, and she watched his reflection approach like an incoming storm. It is. They stood in silence, looking out at the snow-covered gardens. A frozen fountain stood at the center, its water turned to ice mid-cascade, beautiful and suspended and utterly still. I don't know how to do this, Dorian said finally. Do what? Talk to you, be near you, any of it. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. I've spent 7 years building walls, and now I'm trying to dismantle them, and I have no idea where to start. Alira turned to face him directly. Why are you trying at all? Because Lucien was right. Because this house is suffocating. Because... He stopped, seeming to gather courage. Because I look at you and I see what I've done. And it's unforgivable. You want forgiveness? No, I want to do better. I want to stop treating you like a duty and start treating you like a person. I want... His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. I don't know what I want, but I know this can't continue. The honesty should have satisfied her, should have felt like progress. Instead, it just highlighted how broken everything had become, how far they'd have to climb to reach anything resembling normal. You can't just decide to change and expect me to fall in line, she said quietly. You can't spend 7 years building distance and then erase it with 3 days of sitting in the library. I know. You made me feel invisible. Do you understand that? You made me feel like a mistake you were too polite to correct. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm desperately, inadequately sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. No, it doesn't, but it's where I have to start. A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Lady Pemberton stood there, her expression calculating, clearly having overheard more than was appropriate. Oh, forgive me, she said with false sweetness. I didn't mean to intrude on such a private moment. The moment shattered. Dorian's face closed off, the vulnerable honesty disappearing behind ducal composure. Alira felt her own mask sliding back into place, automatic as breathing. You're not intruding, Dorian said smoothly. We were just discussing the winter plants. How fascinating. Lady Pemberton's smile could cut. Though I must say, the discussion seemed rather intense for horticulture. Some of us are quite passionate about proper plant care, Elira said, matching the woman's false pleasantness with her own. They stood there, 3 people engaged in a battle, fought with smiles and subtext. Lady Pemberton clearly wanted details to share with the other guests. Dorian and Elira clearly wouldn't provide them. The standoff lasted approximately 30 seconds before Lady Pemberton retreated with wounded dignity. That will be all over the house by dinner, Elira said once they were alone again. Let it be. Easy for you to say. You're the Duke. I'm the one who will be dissected over tea. Then we'll be dissected together. The statement hung between them, strange and almost tender. We, together. Words that implied partnership, unity, a front presented to the world as one entity instead of 2 people pretending at connection. I should go, Elira said. Martha will be looking for me. She moved to pass him, but his hand caught her wrist. Gentle, uncertain, the first deliberate touch in longer than she could remember. Wait, he said. She waited. They stood there with his fingers circling her wrist, his thumb resting against her pulse point where it hammered away all pretense of composure. I don't know how to fix this, he said, but I want to try, if you'll let me. The question in his voice undid her. Not a demand, not an assumption, an actual question, waiting for an answer she had the power to give or withhold. I don't know if I can, she whispered. That's fair. 7 years is a long time to be invisible. I don't know how to suddenly be seen. Then we'll figure it out together, slowly, if you're willing. She looked down at his hand on her wrist. His fingers were long, elegant, warm against her skin. She'd forgotten what his touch felt like. Wasn't sure she'd ever really known. I need time, she said. Take all the time you need. He released her wrist and stepped back, giving her space to leave. She walked away on legs that felt unsteady, her wrist still warm where his fingers had been. Behind her, she heard him exhale, long and shaky, like a man who'd just survived something harrowing. Dinner that evening was excruciating. Lady Pemberton had indeed spread word of the passionate discussion about plants, and now everyone watched Dorian and Elira with renewed interest. The Thorntons whispered behind their napkins. The Ashbys observed with cool amusement. Even the Pemberton daughters seemed more interested in the drama between the Duke and Duchess than in capturing Lucien's attention. More wine, Your Grace. A footman appeared at Elira's elbow. Please. She probably shouldn't. The wine was already making her warm, loosening the tight control she usually maintained. But the alternative was enduring this dinner completely sober, and that felt impossible. Easy there, Lucien murmured from across the table. You're not much of a drinker. Perhaps I should be. Perhaps you should eat something instead of pushing food around your plate. He was right, of course. She'd barely touched her dinner. The thought of eating while being observed like a specimen under glass made her stomach turn. The Duchess does seem rather flushed, Mrs. Thornton said loudly. I hope she's not coming down with something. I'm perfectly well, Elira said. Of course you are, dear. Though perhaps the strain of hosting is taking its toll. Running a household this size requires considerable stamina. The implication was clear. Elira lacked the necessary stamina, was inadequate to her position, failed to measure up to previous duchesses who'd managed grand households while also producing heirs. My wife manages extraordinarily well, Dorian said, his voice carrying authority that silenced the table. This house runs more efficiently under her care than it has in generations. The defense was unexpected and public and completely unprecedented. Elira's hand trembled as she set down her wine glass. Dorian's eyes met hers across the table, steady and deliberate. He was choosing her, in front of witnesses, making a statement about her value, her competence, her worth. It shouldn't have mattered so much. It shouldn't have made her chest tight and her eyes sting with tears she absolutely could not shed in front of 24 people. How lovely, Lady Pemberton said with forced brightness. Such devoted spouses. Though one does wonder. One wonders many things, Lucien interrupted, most of which are none of one's business. Curious how that works. Lord Ashby laughed outright. The boy has a point, Helena. We've become terribly intrusive. I wasn't being intrusive, merely observant. Observation becomes intrusion when paired with commentary, Dorian said quietly. Perhaps we might observe the excellent meal instead. Another public statement. Another drawing of lines. Another indication that something had shifted in the careful dynamic of their marriage. The table fell into uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clink of silverware. Elira focused on her plate, trying to process what had just happened. Dorian defending her, Lucien supporting them both. The guests thoroughly chastened. It felt like standing on ice that might crack at any moment, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. After dinner, the women retired to the drawing room as tradition demanded. Elira endured another hour of barely veiled speculation and pointed questions before finally excusing herself with claims of a headache that wasn't entirely false. She made it to her room and closed the door, leaning against it the way she had after that first disastrous dinner with Lucien. How long ago was that? 3 days? 4? Time had become elastic, stretching and compressing unpredictably. My lady? Martha's voice came from the dressing room. Shall I help you prepare for bed? Yes, please. Martha emerged and immediately noticed Elira's state. What happened? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. Elira moved to the dressing table, sinking onto the chair. Dorian defended me at dinner, in front of everyone. He's been different, present, and I don't know what to do with it. Perhaps accept it? Accept what? 3 days of attention? Am I supposed to forget 7 years because he suddenly decided to notice I exist? Martha began unpinning Elira's hair with practiced gentleness. No, but you might consider that people can change, that they can recognize their mistakes and try to correct them. What if it's temporary? What if Lucien leaves and Dorian goes back to the way things were? What if I let myself hope and it destroys me? What if you don't let yourself hope and destroy yourself anyway? The question settled into Alira's bones. She'd spent 7 years protecting herself through emotional withdrawal, through making herself smaller, through expecting nothing. And where had it gotten her? Miserable, invisible, slowly disappearing. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of course you are. Fear is what happens when something might actually change." Martha finished with her hair and began unlacing the evening gown. The ritual was soothing, buttons and laces, silk sliding off shoulders, the transformation from duchess to woman happening in familiar stages. "He touched my wrist today," Alira said, "in the conservatory. Just held my wrist and asked if I'd let him try to fix things." "And what did you say?" "That I needed time." "Smart." Martha folded the gown with careful precision. "Don't give him anything easily. Make him earn it." "Is that cruel?" "No, it's self-preservation. He made you wait 7 years. He can wait a few weeks." Alira pulled on her nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind spun with images of the day. Dorian in the library, Dorian in the conservatory, Dorian defending her at dinner. Each moment a crack in the careful walls she'd built around her heart. She was still awake when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, hesitant, stopping outside her door. Her breath caught. She waited for the knock, for the conversation, for something. The footsteps moved away. His door opened and closed. Almost. They kept almost connecting, almost bridging the distance, almost becoming something real, but almost wasn't enough. Almost was just another form of nothing. She turned onto her side, pulling the covers up to her chin, and stared at the wall that separated her room from his. 3 doors down. Might as well be 3 continents. Sometime near dawn, she finally slept, falling into dreams where walls crumbled and distances disappeared and she could finally breathe. She woke to someone screaming. Alira sat bolt upright, heart hammering, trying to orient herself. Gray morning light filtered through curtains. The screaming continued, high-pitched, terrified, coming from somewhere downstairs. She threw on her dressing gown and ran, not bothering with slippers, her bare feet slapping against cold floors. Other guests emerged from rooms, confused and alarmed. Lucien appeared beside her, still half-dressed, his hair wild. "What's happening?" "I don't know." They reached the main staircase together. Below, in the entrance hall, chaos reigned. The Pemberton daughters huddled together, one of them, Henrietta, still screaming. Servants rushed about. Mrs. Hallowell barked orders. And in the center of it all, Dorian stood perfectly still, staring at something on the floor. Alira descended the stairs, Lucien right behind her. As she got closer, she saw what everyone was staring at, a portrait. Massive, ornate, centuries old. The previous duchess, Dorian's mother, in full formal dress. It had hung in the entrance hall since before Alira arrived, a silent guardian watching everyone come and go. Now it lay face down on the marble, its frame shattered, canvas torn. "It just fell," Henrietta sobbed. "We were walking past and it just fell. It could have killed us." "Nobody's hurt?" Dorian's voice was carefully controlled. "No, Your Grace," Mrs. Hallowell said. "Just badly shaken." "Then there's no emergency. Please, everyone, return to your rooms. We'll handle this." The guests dispersed reluctantly, disappointed at being denied drama. The servants began clearing debris. Soon only Dorian, Alira, and Lucien remained, staring at the destroyed portrait. "The hanging must have been faulty," Lucien said. "That frame was ancient, probably just finally gave way." "It's been hanging there for 30 years without incident," Dorian said quietly. "Things break. It happens. Not like this. Not now." There was something in his voice, not quite fear, but close. Alira moved closer, studying the destroyed portrait. The canvas had torn across the painted face, splitting the former duchess's severe expression in two. "What are you thinking?" she asked Dorian. He looked at her, and his expression was unreadable. That perhaps some things are better fallen. The statement hung there, loaded with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. His mother's portrait. The symbol of previous generations, previous expectations, previous ways of managing a marriage. Fallen. "Get rid of it," Dorian told Mrs. Hallowell. "Completely. I don't want it repaired or stored. Remove it entirely." The housekeeper's eyebrows rose. "Your Grace, it's a family heirloom. It's a painting, and I want it gone." As you wish. Mrs. Hallowell supervised the removal, footmen carrying away the pieces. Dorian watched them go with an expression Elira couldn't decipher. You loved your mother, Lucian said carefully. I did, but I don't need her portrait watching me anymore. Don't need her expectations hanging over my head, literally or figuratively. Bold move, brother. Long overdue move. Dorian turned to Elira. I'm sorry you were disturbed. The screaming must have been alarming. I'm fine. More concerned about you. Me? Why? That portrait has been there your entire life. It seems significant to remove it. Everything is significant if you let it be. He looked at the empty wall where the portrait had hung. Or perhaps nothing is, and we just assign meaning to justify our choices. Which is it? I'm not sure yet. Ask me again when I figure it out. He left then, heading toward his study, shoulders tight with tension he was trying to hide. Lucien watched him go, then turned to Elira. He's unraveling, Lucien said. Is that good or bad? Depends on what we find when the unraveling is done. The day proceeded with forced normalcy. Breakfast was subdued, everyone still rattled by the morning's drama. The men went shooting despite the cold, seeking outdoor activity to burn off nervous energy. The women gathered for needlework and gossip, though the gossip had shifted from Elira's marriage to the fallen portrait and what it might mean. Omens, Mrs. Thornton said dramatically. When portraits fall in old houses, it's always an omen. Of what? Beatrice Pemberton asked, eyes wide. Change, usually dramatic change. Perhaps the Duke will finally produce an heir, Lady Pemberton suggested with false optimism. That would certainly be dramatic. Elira focused on her embroidery, stabbing the needle through fabric with more force than necessary. She'd spent 7 years enduring these conversations, these implications, these constant reminders of her primary failure. Perhaps the Duke will throw you all out for being insufferable, she said. The room went silent. Every woman turned to stare at her. Elira looked up from her embroidery, meeting their shocked gazes with deliberate calm. Forgive me, she said sweetly. Did I say that aloud? Your Grace, Lady Hartwick said stiffly. Such language is unbecoming. So is speculating about your host's private life, yet here we all are. I hardly think that's the problem, isn't it? Hardly thinking, just talking, constantly talking about things that are none of your concern. Lady Pemberton's face flushed. We're merely making conversation. No, you're being cruel. Hiding it behind politeness doesn't change what it is. Elira stood, setting aside her embroidery with careful precision. If you'll excuse me, I have better things to do than listen to thinly veiled insults disguised as concern. She walked out, leaving behind a room of shocked, offended women. Her hand shook as she climbed the stairs, adrenaline making her lightheaded. She'd never done anything like that before. Never challenged guests, never called out their behavior, never allowed herself to be anything other than perfectly accommodating. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. She made it to her room before the shaking became uncontrollable. She sat on the edge of the bed, pressing her palms flat against her thighs, trying to steady herself. A knock. Elira? It's Lucien. Can I come in? She opened the door. Lucien slipped inside, closing it behind him with a grin that lit up his entire face. That, he said, was magnificent. That was disastrous. I just insulted half our guests. You stood up for yourself. There's a difference. They'll leave. They'll tell everyone. The scandal. Let them. Who cares what they think? I care. Dorian cares. Reputation matters. Reputation is just other people's opinions, and their opinions are clearly terrible. Elira sank back onto the bed, dropping her head into her hands. I don't know what's happening to me. 3 days ago, I would never have said those things. I would have smiled and endured and pretended it was fine. 3 days ago, you were slowly disappearing. Now you're becoming visible. That's progress. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like falling apart. Lucien sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Sometimes falling apart is how you rebuild into something better. Or sometimes you just stay broken. Not if you don't let yourself. She looked at him, this man who'd disrupted her entire life by simply returning home and seeing what everyone else ignored. His presence had been the catalyst for everything. Dorian's sudden attention, her own growing rebellion, the cracks forming in the perfect facade they'd maintained for 7 years. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for noticing me, for caring enough to say something. How could I not notice you? You're the most interesting person in this entire house." "I'm the most invisible person in this house." "Not anymore." The door burst open without warning. Dorian stood there, chest heaving like he'd been running, his eyes finding Lucian beside Elira on the bed with laser focus. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Lucian said easily. "Just checking on your wife after she brilliantly eviscerated your guests." "You what?" "I told them to stop being cruel," Elira said. "I may have been less diplomatic than ideal." Dorian's expression shifted from suspicion to something that might have been pride. "What exactly did you say?" "That they were insufferable, and I had better things to do than endure thinly veiled insults." A smile ghosted across his face, brief but genuine. "Lady Pemberton must have loved that. She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon." "Good. She's been insufferable for decades. Someone should have said something years ago." The approval in his voice warmed something in Elira's chest. She'd expected anger, disappointment, concern about scandal. Instead, he looked almost pleased. "You're not angry?" she asked. "Angry? I'm delighted. They've been taking advantage of your politeness for years. They're our guests. They're parasites, and you've finally grown a spine." He caught himself, wincing. "That came out wrong. You've always had a spine. You've just finally decided to use it." Lucien stood, moving toward the door with deliberate casualness. "I should go. Leave you two to whatever this is." He left before either could protest, closing the door softly behind him. Elira and Dorian faced each other across the suddenly smaller room. "I heard what you said," Dorian admitted. "In the drawing room. One of the maids told Mrs. Hallowell, who told me." "Of course she did. I'm glad you said it. They needed to hear it. Even if it causes scandal? Especially then. We've been so obsessed with avoiding scandal that we've allowed ourselves to be diminished by people who matter far less than their opinions suggest." He moved closer, and Elira's pulse kicked up. This proximity still felt dangerous, unfamiliar. 7 years of distance couldn't be erased in a few days, no matter how much either of them might want it. "The portrait falling," she said. "It upset you." "It freed me," he corrected. "That painting has hung there my entire life. My mother's disapproving face, watching every decision, every failure. Having it gone feels like removing shackles I didn't realize I was wearing." "What will you hang there instead?" "Nothing. Leave the wall empty. Let it be a space that isn't defined by previous generations." The symbolism wasn't subtle. Elira understood what he was saying, that he wanted to stop living according to his parents' example, stop following patterns that had failed them both. "Change is frightening," she said. "Staying the same is worse." They stood there, close enough to touch, but not touching. The space between them charged with possibility and fear. Dorian's hand lifted, hovering near her face like he might brush away the strand of hair that had escaped her braid. Then voices in the hallway broke the moment. His hand dropped. The distance reasserted itself. "I should go," he said. "The men will be returning from shooting soon." "Of course." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "Elira?" "Yes?" "Don't stop. Whatever's happening to you, whatever's making you brave enough to speak your mind, don't stop. I prefer you like this." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with words that felt like permission and confession wrapped together. She preferred herself like this too. Visible. Vocal. Refusing to shrink anymore. The question was whether she could sustain it, or if this was just a temporary rebellion that would crumble under the weight of expectation and habit. Only time would tell. And time, at Ashford Manor, moved both glacially slow and terrifyingly fast. That night, Elira couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety this time, but from a restless energy that made her skin feel too tight. She lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her, and thinking about all the words she'd never said. At midnight, she gave up. She pulled on her dressing gown and left her room, not really knowing where she was going, just needing to move. The house at night was a different creature entirely. Moonlight through windows created pools of silver on the dark floors. The temperature dropped enough that her breath misted slightly. Everything felt suspended, waiting. She found herself in the library without conscious decision. The fire had burned down to embers, casting barely enough light to see by. She moved to rebuild it, adding wood with hands that remembered the task from childhood, before servants had done everything for her. Can't sleep either. She spun around. Dorian stood in the doorway, also in his dressing gown, his hair disheveled in a way she'd never seen. He looked younger like this. Less Duke, more man. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said. "You didn't. I was already awake." He moved into the room, keeping distance between them out of habit. "May I?" She nodded. He settled into one of the leather chairs near the rebuilt fire. After a moment's hesitation, she took the chair across from him. They sat in silence while the fire caught, flames climbing higher, pushing back the dark. It should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it felt oddly peaceful. "I used to come here when I was a boy," Dorian said finally. "When my parents were fighting, they'd scream at each other until the whole house shook, and I'd hide in here, reading until they exhausted themselves." Alira had heard rumors about the previous Duke and Duchess, a marriage of spectacular dysfunction, love twisted into weapon, passion that destroyed instead of nourished. Dorian never spoke about them. "How often did they fight?" she asked. "Constantly, violently. They loved each other desperately, hated each other equally. The house was either full of laughter or breaking glass. Nothing in between." That must have been terrifying. It was. And confusing. I'd watch them destroy each other and wonder how something that started as love could become so toxic. He stared into the fire. "When my father died, my mother followed 6 months later. The doctor said heart failure. I think she just didn't know how to exist without him to fight with." The pieces started coming together. Why Dorian had chosen distance, why he'd built walls, why he'd treated their marriage like a business arrangement. "You were afraid," Elira said softly. "Terrified. I swore I'd never let myself feel that kind of destructive passion. I'd be rational, controlled, safe. I'd marry appropriately and maintain proper distance and never, ever let emotion override reason." "So you chose the opposite extreme." "Yes, and created something just as damaging in a different way." He looked at her directly. "I thought I was protecting us both. Instead, I starved us." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Elira's throat tightened. "I thought I'd done something wrong," she whispered. "Thought I wasn't good enough, pretty enough, interesting enough. I spent 7 years trying to figure out what I'd failed at. You didn't fail at anything. The failure was entirely mine. That doesn't make it hurt less. I know, and I'm sorry. Inadequately, insufficiently sorry." They fell silent again. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 1. "What changed?" Alira asked. "Why now? Why after 7 years are you suddenly trying?" Dorian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "Lucian coming back forced me to see what I'd been avoiding. And watching you at dinner that first night, seeing you come alive when he spoke to you, seeing you become visible in a way you never were with me, it was like being punched in the chest. Lucian just asks questions, treats me like a person instead of a decoration." "I know. And I hated it. Hated that my brother could do in one evening what I'd failed to do in 7 years. Hated that you smiled at him in ways you never smiled at me. Hated myself for creating a situation where my own wife was more comfortable with a near stranger than her husband." The jealousy in his voice surprised her. She'd never imagined Dorian capable of jealousy, never thought he cared enough to mind if her attention went elsewhere. "There's nothing between Lucian and me," she said. "I know, but there could be. Not in action, maybe, but in feeling. He sees you. I made you invisible. If you developed feelings for someone who actually notices you exist, I'd have no one to blame but myself. I'm not in love with Lucienne, but you could be, and that terrifies me." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. This was the man beneath the Duke, scared, flawed, struggling. This was who he'd hidden behind 7 years of careful distance. "I married you," she said, "not him. Despite everything, despite the loneliness and the silence, I've never regretted the choice itself. Only what we made of it. What do you want, Alira? From me? From this marriage? From your life?" The question was so direct, so open, that for a moment she couldn't answer. What did she want? She'd spent so long managing expectations and suppressing desires that she'd lost track of her own needs. I want to matter, she said finally. I want conversations that go deeper than weather and menus. I want to be asked my opinion and have it actually influence decisions. I want... She stopped, the next words catching. What? He prompted gently. I want to be touched. Not out of obligation or duty, just touched. Like I'm real. Like I'm here. The confession laid her bare. Dorian's expression shifted into something that looked like pain. I've touched you exactly 3 times in 7 years, he said hoarsely. Our wedding day. Once when you fell on ice and I steadied you. And yesterday in the conservatory. I know, I counted 2. That's unforgivable. It's just true. He stood abruptly, moving to the window, his back to her. His shoulders were rigid with tension. I don't know how to do this, he said. I don't know how to be close to someone without losing control. My parents' marriage taught me that passion destroys. So I chose numbness. But numbness destroys too, just more slowly. Elira stood, moving closer. Not touching, but close enough to feel his warmth. Maybe there's something between those extremes, she said. Maybe we can find a middle ground that's neither explosive passion nor frozen distance. And if we can't? If I'm too damaged to know how? Then we figure it out together, messily, imperfectly, like actual people instead of aristocratic statues. He turned to face her. In the firelight, his eyes looked almost black, deep and fathomless. I want to touch you, he said quietly. I want to know what your hair feels like when it's not pinned up. I want to hold your hand without it being a formal escort. I want... He stopped, jaw tight. But I'm afraid that if I start, I won't be able to maintain proper boundaries. That I'll become my father, needing and wanting until it consumes everything. What if proper boundaries are the problem? What if the walls you built to protect us are actually the things hurting us most? Then I've wasted 7 years building a prison. Not wasted, just misdirected. We can tear down walls. It's harder than building them, but possible. They stood close enough that she could see his pulse jumping in his throat, close enough that one step would eliminate all distance, close enough to be terrifying. Dorian's hand lifted slowly, hovering near her face the way it had in her room. This time, he didn't pull away. His fingers brushed her cheek, tentative and careful, like touching something precious that might shatter. Your skin is soft, he said, wonder in his voice. Did you think it would be otherwise? I didn't let myself think about it at all. His thumb traced her cheekbone, learning the shape of her face like a blind man reading Braille. Elira held perfectly still, afraid any movement might spook him back into retreat. Is this all right? He asked. Yes. His other hand came up, cupping her face between both palms. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. 7 years of distance, bridged by 2 hands and the courage to finally cross an impossible divide. I've been an idiot, he whispered. A very proper, very controlled idiot. The worst kind. She smiled and something in his expression cracked. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers in the small space between them. They stood like that for a long moment, not kissing, just existing in proximity, learning each other, remembering what it felt like to be close. I don't know what happens next, Dorian said against her skin. Neither do I. But we don't have to figure it all out tonight. No. But I needed you to know. I see you. I've always seen you, even when I was pretending not to. And I'm done pretending. The words settled into her bones, warm and real, not a complete fix, not an erasure of 7 years, but a beginning. A sound from the hallway made them spring apart. Footsteps passed by, a servant checking the fires or a guest unable to sleep. The moment fragmented, reality reasserting itself. You should go, Elira said reluctantly, before someone sees us and creates scandal. Let them see. I don't care anymore. You will in the morning when Lady Pemberton spreads it across 3 counties. He smiled ruefully. Valid point, though I'm finding I care less about gossip than I once did. Revolutionary? You're a bad influence on my propriety. Good. Your propriety was suffocating. They moved toward the door together. In the hallway they paused, the reality of separate rooms waiting. Good night, Elira, Dorian said. Good night. Good night. She started toward her room, but his voice stopped her. Elira? She turned back. I meant what I said. I'm done pretending. Whatever that means, wherever it leads, I'm done. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and continued to her room. Behind her, she heard him walk the opposite direction, his footsteps fading. But something had shifted. Some fundamental change had occurred in that library, in those moments of honest conversation and tentative touch. The walls hadn't crumbled, but cracks had formed. Light was getting through. Martha was waiting in her room, dozing in a chair. She woke when Elira entered, taking in her flushed cheeks and disheveled state with knowing eyes. Midnight wandering? I couldn't sleep. Did you find what you were looking for? Elira thought about Dorian's hands on her face, his forehead against hers, his voice admitting fear and failure. I think so, she said. Or at least the beginning of it. Good. You deserve a beginning. Morning arrived gray and cold, snow falling steadily outside. The guests gathered for breakfast in various states of crankiness, the Pembertons still offended from yesterday's confrontation, the Thorntons fishing for new gossip, the Ashbys watching everything with amused detachment. Dorian entered the breakfast room just as Elira did. Their eyes met across the space, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, memory, the secret knowledge of what had happened in the library. He crossed to her, ignoring the available seats elsewhere, and pulled out the chair beside her. May I? He asked. Every conversation at the table stopped. The Duke and Duchess, who typically sat at opposite ends or avoided breakfast entirely, were choosing to sit together. Of course, Elira said. He sat. She felt the warmth of him along her right side, a presence she'd forgotten was possible. They served themselves from the sideboard offerings in companionable silence, while 24 eyes tracked their every movement. Sleep well? Dorian asked casually, spreading marmalade on toast. Eventually, you? The same. It was such a normal exchange, such a mundane conversation, but everyone at the table leaned in like it was revelatory. The snow is quite heavy, Lady Hartwick observed loudly. I hope the roads remain passable. If they don't, you'll simply have to extend your stay, Dorian said without enthusiasm. Lucien laughed into his coffee. Careful, brother. That sounded almost like you want them to leave. I'm merely being practical. If the roads close, we're trapped together whether we like it or not. How cozy, Mrs. Thornton said, with false brightness. Like a real family Christmas. We're not family, Clarissa Pemberton said with unusual directness. We're guests you're obligated to host. Finally, Lucien said, someone admits the truth. Lady Pemberton looked horrified. Clarissa, apologize immediately. Why? It's true. We're here because Mother wants to parade us in front of eligible men, not because we actually enjoy country house parties in the dead of winter. Clarissa Eugenia Pemberton. She's not wrong, Beatrice added. This is tedious. Everyone pretending to have a delightful time when really, we're all just enduring each other until it's polite to leave. The rebellion was spreading, first Elira calling out cruelty, now the Pemberton daughters admitting dissatisfaction. The carefully maintained facade was cracking everywhere. Well, Lord Ashby said into the stunned silence, at least we're being honest now. Refreshing change from the usual hypocrisy. Honest? Lady Pemberton sputtered. This is disrespectful. We are guests. Uninvited guests, if memory serves, Dorian said mildly. We didn't extend invitations. You all simply announced you were coming, and we accommodated, because that's what one does. More silence. The truth was spreading like fire. They were performing for each other, maintaining appearances, pretending at connection while actually just fulfilling social obligations. If everyone is so miserable, Elira said carefully, perhaps we should acknowledge it and adjust accordingly. Adjust how? Mrs. Thornton demanded. By being honest about what we actually want instead of what we think we should want. And what do you want, Your Grace? Lady Pemberton asked, heavy with implication. Elira looked at Dorian. He was already looking at her. In his eyes, she saw permission, to be honest, to be bold, to say what 7 years had taught her to suppress. I want to stop pretending, she said. I want real conversation instead of performance. I want to know people instead of just knowing their titles. I want, she turned to address the whole table. I want to stop playing these games where we all pretend to be perfect while secretly judging each other's failures. Here, here, Lucian raised his coffee cup. This is highly inappropriate, Lady Hartwick said stiffly. So is gossiping about your host's marriage, yet you seem comfortable with that, Elira countered. The older woman flushed. I never... You did. Everyone has. You've spent days speculating about why we have no children, whether my husband has a mistress, whether I'm adequate to my position, and I've spent days enduring it with polite silence. But I'm done being polite about cruelty. It wasn't cruelty, Mrs. Thornton protested. It was concern. It was judgment dressed up as concern. There's a difference. Dorian's hand found hers under the table, his fingers threading through hers. The touch was hidden from view, but unmistakable in impact. He was choosing her, publicly supporting her even in this uncomfortable confrontation. My wife is correct, he said quietly. We've allowed behavior that shouldn't be allowed because we prioritize politeness over boundaries. That ends now. Are you throwing us out? Lady Pemberton asked, aghast. No, but I'm suggesting that we either commit to actual honesty and connection, or we maintain polite distance and stop pretending at intimacy we don't feel. The table erupted into chaos, protests, agreements, shocked exclamations. Through it all, Dorian's hand stayed linked with Elira's, a solid anchor in the storm. Eventually, the breakfast disbanded, guests retreating to process this unexpected turn. Only Lucien remained, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin. That, he said, was magnificent. Both of you. I'm genuinely proud. We've probably scandalized everyone, Elira said. Good. They needed scandalizing. They've been comfortable in their cruelty for too long. What if they leave and tell everyone we're unsuitable hosts? Then they tell everyone. Your reputation survives. And honestly, would you want to host people like that again anyway? Dorian stood, but kept hold of Elira's hand, drawing her up with him. He's right. I'm done managing other people's comfort at the expense of our own. When did you become so rebellious? Elira asked. When I realized rebellion might be the only way to save what I've been slowly destroying. They left the breakfast room together, still holding hands, not caring who saw. It felt strange and wonderful and terrifying, this public claiming, this visible connection. In the hallway, they encountered Mrs. Hallowell supervising the maids. Your Grace, she said to Dorian, several guests have requested early departures. The Pembertons and Thorntons wish to leave as soon as the roads are passable. Let them leave, Dorian said. We'll arrange transportation. And the others? Allow them to decide for themselves. No pressure either way. Mrs. Hallowell's expression was carefully neutral, but Elira caught the slight smile tugging at her lips. The housekeeper had witnessed 7 years of dysfunction. She was clearly pleased to see change, however messy. By afternoon, half the guests had departed, the Pembertons and Thorntons fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The Hartwicks stayed, claiming the roads were too dangerous despite the Pembertons managing fine. The Ashbys stayed because they were entertained by the drama. The house felt different with fewer people, less oppressive, more breathable. Elira found herself in the conservatory again, drawn to the warmth and light. She was examining a winter jasmine when Dorian appeared, as if summoned by pattern. You keep coming here, he observed. It's the only place that feels alive in winter. Everything else is frozen. Not everything. He moved beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. Some things are thawing. Slowly, painfully, but thawing nonetheless. She turned to face him. In the afternoon light, she could see details she'd never noticed. Gold flecks in his eyes, a small scar near his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly when it wasn't properly tamed. I'm still angry, she said quietly, at you, at myself, at all the time we wasted. You have every right to be. But I'm also hopeful, and that scares me more than anger. Why? Because anger is safe. Anger protects. Hope makes you vulnerable. Then we'll be vulnerable together. His hand came up to cup her face, repeating last night's gesture in daylight. But this time he didn't stop there. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to retreat, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, nothing like the passionate embraces described in novels. It was careful and uncertain, and absolutely perfect for what it was. A first kiss between two people who'd been married 7 years but were only now learning each other. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I should have done that years ago, he said. Yes, you should have. Can I do it again? Please. The second kiss was less careful, more certain. His arms came around her, pulling her close. She fit against him like she'd been designed for this purpose, her head tucking perfectly under his chin. We're going to make mistakes, she said against his chest. We're going to hurt each other. Years of distance can't be fixed in days. I know, but we can try. Trying might not be enough. It's more than we've had before. She pulled back to look at him. What do you want, Dorian? Really want? I want you to say my name the way you did in your sleep. The statement confused her. What? Last night, or maybe the night before. You said my name. I heard it through the walls. It sounded... He stopped, searching for words. Desperate, aching, real. I've never heard you say it like that while awake. Heat flooded her face. She'd had a dream. She couldn't remember details, just the feeling of want, of need, of reaching for something just out of grasp. I didn't know you could hear through the walls, she whispered. I've heard you cry. I've heard you pace. I've heard you exist just 3 doors away while I pretended you didn't. And that night, I heard you say my name like it mattered, and it broke something in me. What did it break? The lie I'd been telling myself, that distance was safer, that not feeling was better, that I could live this way indefinitely without it destroying me. Elira's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. Not yet. Not when they were finally being honest. Say my name, Dorian said softly. The way you did in your sleep. I don't remember how I said it. Then say it however it feels true right now. She looked at him, really looked, seeing the man instead of the Duke, the person instead of the title. Saw his fear and hope and desperate need for something real. Dorian, she breathed, and felt the word carry weight it never had before. His arms tightened around her. Again. Dorian. Like you mean it. I do mean it. Then show me. She pulled his face down to hers and kissed him with 7 years of suppressed longing, suppressed anger, suppressed need. Kissed him like she was trying to cross an ocean in a single step. Kissed him like it might be the last chance she ever got. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking. We should stop, Dorian said hoarsely. We're in the conservatory. Anyone could walk in. I don't care. You will when Lady Hartwick finds us and it's all over London by New Year. Let it be all over London. Let everyone know we actually desire each other. Maybe then they'll stop questioning whether our marriage is real. He laughed, a surprise sound that turned into something that might have been a sob. 7 years. 7 years I've wanted you and convinced myself I shouldn't. Why shouldn't you? I'm your wife. Because wanting leads to needing and needing leads to destruction. That's what I learned. That's what I've believed. And now? Now I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's the not wanting, the not needing, that destroys. Maybe we've been dying of thirst while standing beside water. The metaphor was apt. They'd had access to connection, to intimacy, to everything a marriage could offer. They'd just been too afraid to reach for it. So what now? Elira asked. Now we stop being afraid, or at least we try to be afraid together instead of alone. A noise from the doorway made them spring apart guiltily. Lucien stood there, eyebrows raised, looking between them with barely suppressed amusement. Don't stop on my account, he said. This is the most interesting thing I've seen since the snowman incident. How long have you been standing there? Dorian demanded. Long enough to know you two are finally figuring things out, about time. Privacy isn't a concept you understand, is it? Not particular. Lucien sauntered in, shameless. But I come bearing news. The Ashbys are leaving tomorrow. The Hartwicks the day after. By Christmas Eve, the house will be empty except for us. Us? Elira said. You, brooding brother, and charming me. A family Christmas, cozy. Dorian looked like he was considering violence. You're enjoying this far too much. I've been gone 7 years. I'm entitled to enjoy watching you both become human beings instead of marble statues. We weren't that bad, Elira protested. You were worse. You were ghosts haunting your own lives. But you're getting better. There's hope yet. He left them alone again, whistling as he went. Elira and Dorian looked at each other, and suddenly they were both laughing, at Lucien's audacity, at their own awkwardness, at the absurdity of everything. He's insufferable, Dorian said. He's honest. Same thing. No, honesty is just uncomfortable when you're used to pretending. Dorian pulled her close again, resting his chin on top of her head. We're really doing this? Trying? I think we are. I'm going to fail. I'm going to retreat into old habits. I'm going to hurt you without meaning to. I know, and I'm going to be angry and scared and probably push you away sometimes. We're both damaged. This won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile is. They stood there holding each other while afternoon faded into evening, while the house prepared for another night, while the snow kept falling outside. They stood there and chose each other, messily and imperfectly, in the way real people do when they've finally stopped performing and started living. Later that night, Elira lay in bed, unable to sleep again, but this time for entirely different reasons. Her lips still felt warm from Dorian's kisses. Her body still remembered the shape of his arms around her. Her mind kept replaying every word, every touch, every moment. 3 doors down, she heard movement. Footsteps in the hall, approaching her door, stopping outside. She held her breath, waited. A soft knock. Elira? Dorian's voice, quiet and uncertain. Are you awake? She got up and opened the door. He stood there in his dressing gown, hair disheveled, looking vulnerable in ways she'd never seen. I can't sleep, he said. I keep thinking about you being 3 doors away and it feels like 3 continents. I know. Can I? He stopped, seeming to gather courage. Can I stay? Just to talk. Or just to be near you. I don't expect... I'm not asking for... Yes, she interrupted. You can stay. He came in and she closed the door behind him. They stood awkwardly in her bedroom, both aware of the magnitude of this moment. This room had been hers alone for 7 years. Now she was inviting him in, breaking the final barrier. The bed or the chairs, she asked. Whatever you're comfortable with. She chose the bed, climbing in and pulling the covers over her lap. After a moment, Dorian joined her, sitting atop the covers on the other side, maintaining a careful distance. This is strange, he said. Very. But good strange. I think so. Ask me again when I'm less terrified. They sat in silence, adjusting to the strangeness of proximity. Eventually Dorian spoke. Tell me something true, he said. Something I don't know. Elira thought about it. I used to pretend you were dead. Not cruelly, just easier. I'd imagine I was a widow instead of a wife with a living husband who didn't want me. Being a widow seemed less painful than being invisible. His sharp intake of breath told her the words had landed. I'm sorry. I know, but the apology doesn't erase it. No. Nothing can erase it. I can only try to build something better going forward. What if we can't? What if 7 years of damage is too much to repair? Then we tried. That's more than most people do. She looked at him in the dim light from the dying fire. He looked exhausted, scared, determined. He looked human. Tell me something true, she said. Something I don't know. I used to stand outside your door at night, he admitted. After I heard you crying, I'd stand there and talk myself out of knocking, convince myself you were better off without my interference. Then I'd go back to my room and hate myself for being a coward. Why didn't you knock? Fear. Pure fear. I was afraid that if I started caring, I wouldn't be able to control it, that I'd become my father, obsessive, possessive, destructive, so I chose nothing over something and made us both miserable. Do you still believe that? That caring is dangerous? No. Now I think refusing to care is what's dangerous. It's just a different kind of destruction. They fell silent again. After a while, Elira shifted, sliding down to lie properly in bed. Dorian stayed sitting, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You should sleep, he said. I'll go. Don't, please, just stay. We don't have to do anything. Just be here. He looked torn, but eventually lay down beside her, staying on top of the covers, while she remained beneath them. A barrier, but a thin one. They lay facing each other in the dark, close enough to feel each other's breath. This is progress, Elira whispered. Is it? We're in the same bed. That's 7 years' worth of progress in one night. We're barely touching. But we're here. That's something. Dorian's hand found hers in the space between them, fingers linking. It's something, he agreed. They fell asleep like that, holding hands, 7 years of distance finally, fragility starting to bridge. Not fixed, not whole, but trying. And trying was more than they'd had in years. Elira woke to pale winter light and the startling warmth of another person beside her. For a moment, she couldn't place the sensation. 7 years of sleeping alone had made solitude normal. Then memory returned in a rush. Dorian, in her bed, still holding her hand. She turned her head carefully. He was already awake, watching her with an expression that was part wonder, part terror. "Morning," he said quietly. "You stayed." "I did. Is that all right?" "Yes. I half expected to wake up alone. Thought maybe I'd imagined it." "No, I'm here." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a small touch that felt enormous. "Though I should probably leave before the servants start their rounds, scandal and all that." "Since when do you care about scandal?" "Since I realize my reputation can survive it, but you shouldn't have to endure the gossip." She sat up, and the movement broke their handhold. The loss felt disproportionate to what they'd actually been doing, just lying beside each other, barely touching. But after 7 years of nothing, barely touching felt like everything. "Dorian, she said carefully, we need to talk about what happens next." His expression shuddered slightly. "Regrets already?" "No, but we can't just pretend 7 years didn't happen. We can't kiss a few times and hold hands and act like everything is fixed." "I know that. Do you? Because you seem to be moving very fast. Yesterday, we were strangers. Today, you're sleeping in my bed. Tomorrow, what? We're perfectly happy?" The words came out harsher than intended, but she needed him to understand. She needed him to know that her anger hadn't disappeared just because her hope had appeared. Dorian sat up too, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You're right. I'm rushing, trying to make up for lost time by compressing it all into a few days. That's not fair to either of us. I need time to trust this, to trust you, to believe this isn't just temporary guilt that'll fade once Lucian leaves and everything goes back to normal. It won't go back. I won't let it. You say that now, but habits are powerful. Distance is comfortable when you're used to it. What happens when being close gets difficult? When we fight or disappoint each other? Will you retreat again?" The question hung between them, brutal in its honesty. Dorian's jaw tightened. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to promise I won't. But I've spent 32 years building walls. 7 of those years were dedicated to keeping you out specifically. I can't guarantee I won't slip back into old patterns when things get hard. At least you're being honest. Honesty seems to be all I have left to offer." Elira drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The vulnerability of this conversation felt exposing, dangerous, but necessary. "I'm angry at you," she said quietly. "Even while I'm hoping we can fix this, I'm still so angry. You stole 7 years from me, from us, and I don't know how to hold both things at once, the anger and the hope. You don't have to choose. Be angry. Stay angry as long as you need. I deserve it. Anger is exhausting. So is pretending you're not angry." He was right. She'd spent years swallowing resentment, converting it into numbness just to survive. The prospect of actually feeling it, expressing it, seemed overwhelming. "What if I hurt you?" she asked. "What if my anger becomes cruel?" "Then it becomes cruel. I can take it. I've done worse to you through absence than you could ever do to me through words." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Martha's voice came through. "My lady, are you awake?" Dorian was off the bed in seconds, heading for the door that connected her room to the adjacent sitting room. "I'll go this way," he whispered. "Dorian." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "This conversation isn't finished," Elira said. "I know. We'll continue it. I promise." He slipped out just as Martha entered from the hallway, carrying a breakfast tray. If the maid noticed the rumpled state of both sides of the bed, she didn't comment. "The last of the guests are leaving this morning," Martha said, setting down the tray. "By noon, the house will be empty except for family." "That's a relief." "Is it? You'll have no buffer between you and the Duke, no performances to hide behind." Elira hadn't considered that. The guests had been exhausting, but they'd also provided distraction. Without them, she and Dorian would have to actually navigate this new dynamic without an audience. "I think I prefer it," she said. "The performing was killing me." "Good. You're better when you're real." Martha helped her dress in a simple day gown. No need for elaborate outfits without guests to impress. As she worked, Elira caught her watching in the mirror with an expression that was part concern, part hope. "You're worried," Elira said. "I'm cautious. I've seen too many false starts in this house, too many moments where things almost changed but didn't. This feels different. Does it? Or do you just want it to be different?" The question was fair. Elira wanted to believe this time was real, that Dorian's change was genuine, but want didn't make something true. "I guess we'll find out," she said. Downstairs, the house buzzed with departure preparations. The Ashbys left first, Lord Ashby offering Dorian a knowing smile and words too quiet for Elira to hear. The Hartwicks followed, Lady Hartwick still radiating disapproval at the whole scandalous week. By early afternoon, the entrance hall stood empty except for abandoned calling cards and the faint scent of expensive perfume. The silence felt different than before. Not oppressive, but clean, like a reset. "Finally," Lucian said, appearing from the direction of the library. "Alone at last. Well, the three of us. Still better than 24 people pretending to enjoy each other's company. What will you do now?" Elira asked. "Now that your mission to disrupt our lives is complete? Mission to disrupt?" "I prefer to think of it as mission to wake you both up. And it worked beautifully." "Where will you go? You can't have come back just to point out our dysfunction." Lucien's expression shifted, the easy humor fading into something more serious. "I came back because I was tired of running. Because 7 years away taught me that you can't escape your past by changing locations. And because..." He looked at Dorian. "Because you're my brother, and despite everything, I missed you." Dorian seemed genuinely surprised. "You have a terrible way of showing affection. I learned from you. You ignored your wife for 7 years. At least I only needled you for a week. That's not the same. Isn't it? We're both masters at avoiding what scares us. I just used distance, and you used emotional walls." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. The brothers stood looking at each other, years of hurt and misunderstanding between them. "I'm sorry," Dorian said finally, "for giving you an ultimatum, for making you choose between who you were and staying in this family. That was wrong." Lucian's throat worked. "I'm sorry for leaving without trying harder to make you understand, for letting 7 years pass without contact, for..." His voice cracked slightly. "For missing so much of your life." They moved together awkwardly, embracing the way men do when emotion makes them uncomfortable. Elira watched, her own throat tight. This household had been frozen for so long that watching things thaw felt almost painful. When they separated, both brothers looked suspiciously damp around the eyes. "So you're staying?" Dorian asked. "For a while, if that's all right. The West Wing is yours as long as you want it. Even though I'm insufferable?" "Especially because you're insufferable. Apparently we needed insufferable." Lucian grinned. "See? I'm a gift." "You're welcome." He left them alone, heading toward the library with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. Dorian watched him go, then turned to Elira. "Walk with me?" he asked. "Where?" "Anywhere. Nowhere. I want to be near you without an audience." They bundled into winter coats and stepped outside. The snow had stopped, leaving everything crystalline and pristine. Their breath misted in the cold air as they walked through the gardens, following paths Elira had walked alone countless times. But she wasn't alone now. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," Dorian began. "About needing time, about holding anger and hope simultaneously. You're right. I was rushing, trying to fix 7 years in a few days. And now? Now I want to ask what you need, not what I think you should need, not what would make me feel less guilty. What do you actually need from me?" The question was so direct, so genuinely interested in her answer, that Elira had to stop walking. She turned to face him, the winter sun turning his hair almost bronze, highlighting the exhaustion in his face. "I need consistency," she said. "I need to know that a month from now, 6 months from now, you'll still be trying. That this isn't just a dramatic moment that'll fade." "What else?" "I need you to listen when I'm angry. Not to fix it or defend yourself, just to hear it. Because I'm going to be angry sometimes, and I need space for that." "Okay. What else?" "I need..." She paused, the next request harder to voice. "I need you to be patient with me. I've spent 7 years building my own walls. Mine might be harder to dismantle than yours. I can be patient. Can you? You're not known for patience. Then I'll learn. What else? Stop asking what else. That's enough for now. He smiled slightly. See? Already being impatient. But you're right. I'll work on it. They continued walking, the cold biting at exposed skin. Alira's fingers were going numb despite her gloves. Dorian noticed and, without asking, pulled off his gloves and handed them to her. I have my own, she protested. Mine are warmer. Take them. The gesture was small, practical, nothing romantic about it, but it hit her harder than his kisses had, this simple act of noticing her discomfort and addressing it without being asked. Thank you, she said quietly. They reached the frozen fountain, the same one she'd looked at from the conservatory. Up close, she could see where water had frozen mid-drip, creating impossible icicle sculptures. Beautiful and frozen, Dorian observed. Rather appropriate metaphor for us. We're thawing. Messily. Painfully. But yes. Alira touched one of the icicles, feeling its cold smoothness. What scares you most about this? About us trying? Dorian was quiet for a long moment. Failing. Hurting you worse than I already have. Discovering I'm too damaged to sustain actual intimacy. Those are all focused on your failure. What about mine? What about yours? What if I can't forgive you? What if the anger never fades enough to build something real? What if I'm too broken from 7 years of invisibility to remember how to be seen? Then we figure it out. Together. You keep saying that, together. But we don't know how to be together. We only know how to be separate. Then we learn. Badly at first, probably. But we learn. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that effort and intention were enough. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it real. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. What if this is another performance? What if we're just playing at connection without actually achieving it? Then we keep trying until it's not a performance anymore. Until it becomes real. A bird called somewhere in the frozen garden, the sound sharp and clear in the winter air. Alira watched her breath mist, thinking about all the words she'd held back over the years, all the wants she'd suppressed, all the versions of herself she'd abandoned to fit into a space that was never meant for her. I don't want to be small anymore, she said. I don't want to shrink myself to make you comfortable. Good. Be big. Be loud. Be difficult. Be real. You might not like who I am when I stop performing. I might not, but at least it'll be true. The honesty was brutal and refreshing. No promises that everything would be perfect. No guarantees that liking each other was inevitable. Just a commitment to truth, whatever that looked like. We should go back, Alira said, before we freeze out here. They walked back slowly, neither eager to return to the house, and whatever conversations waited. At the door, Dorian paused. Tonight, he said. Would you want to have dinner? Just us? No guests? No performance? Just conversation. What would we talk about? I don't know. Everything. Nothing. Things we should have talked about 7 years ago. That sounds terrifying. It does, but I think we need terrifying. She nodded. Dinner. Just us. I'll tell Mrs. Hallowell. Inside, the house felt different without guests. Larger somehow. Echoing. Alira found herself wandering, rediscovering spaces she'd moved through on autopilot for years. The library where she'd hidden. The music room she'd avoided because the pianoforte reminded her of her mother. The portrait gallery where dead Ashbournes judged silently. She stopped at the empty space where Dorian's mother's portrait had hung. The wall was lighter there, protected from years of dust and smoke by the massive frame. Strange, isn't it? She turned. Lucian had appeared beside her, studying the empty wall with an unreadable expression. What is? How quickly absence becomes normal. That portrait hung there my entire life. Now it's gone, and already the space feels right. Did you hate her? Your mother? Hate? No, I pitied her. She loved my father so desperately that it consumed her, made her cruel and obsessive and ultimately miserable. She taught me that love was dangerous, taught Dorian the same thing. He said they destroyed each other. They did, spectacularly, and we both learned different wrong lessons from it. I learned to never commit. He learned to never feel, Neither approach actually works. Alira looked at the empty wall. What's the right lesson? That love doesn't have to be destructive, that you can care about someone without losing yourself, that intensity and stability aren't mutually exclusive. He glanced at her. But knowing the lesson and living it are different things. Are you giving me advice? I'm giving you perspective. My brother is trying, badly, awkwardly, but genuinely. The question is whether you can meet him halfway. Why wouldn't I? Because meeting him halfway means being vulnerable, means risking hurt, means believing change is possible after 7 years of evidence to the contrary. That's a lot to ask. He hurt me. He did, badly. But he's also trying to do better. At some point, you'll have to decide if that's enough. The observation settled uncomfortably. Lucian was right. She'd have to choose. Keep nursing anger and maintain safety, or risk vulnerability for the possibility of something real. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Then figure it out. But don't wait 7 more years to decide. He left her alone with the empty wall and her tangled thoughts. She stood there until Martha found her, reminding her to prepare for dinner. Dinner was set in the small dining room, not the massive formal space they'd used for guests. Just a table for 2, candles, simplicity. Alira arrived first, her stomach knotted with nerves that felt ridiculous. This was her husband, not a stranger, except he was kind of a stranger. 7 years of marriage, and she didn't know his favorite food, his childhood fears, his dreams. Dorian entered looking equally nervous, his cravat slightly crooked in a way that suggested he'd tied it himself without help. You look nice, he said. So do you. They sat. Servants brought food, simpler than the elaborate courses for guests. Roasted chicken, vegetables, bread, real food instead of performance. For several minutes, they ate in silence. Not comfortable silence. Awkward, uncertain silence where every clink of cutlery seemed too loud. This is strange, Alira said finally. Very. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Have dinner with my wife like a normal person instead of a formal obligation. Ask me something, anything, something you don't know. Dorian set down his fork, thinking. What's your favorite season? Autumn, the in-between time when things are changing but not dead yet. What's yours? I don't know. I've never thought about it. Think about it now. He considered. Spring, maybe, when things come back to life after winter. Appropriate. Your turn. Ask me something. What scared you most as a child? The question was heavier than intended. Dorian's expression darkened. My parents fighting, the sound of glass breaking, never knowing if I'd come home to laughter or violence. He met her eyes. What scared you? Disappearing. Being so unmemorable that people would forget I existed. And I made that fear real. You did, but I let you. I made myself smaller instead of fighting to be seen. They fell quiet again, the weight of honesty making the air thick. But they kept going, asking questions, sharing answers, slowly excavating 7 years of unknowing. She learned he'd wanted to be a botanist before duty demanded he become a duke. He learned she'd wanted to travel, to see places she'd only read about. She learned he played the violin badly but loved trying. He learned she wrote poetry she never showed anyone. By dessert, the awkwardness had eased into something that almost resembled comfort. Not perfect, not easy, but real. I have something to tell you, Dorian said as they finished, and I don't know how you'll react. Alira's stomach dropped. What? I've been consulting with my solicitor about the marriage settlements, the estate laws, everything legal that governs our union. Why? Because you have no power. Legally, you own nothing, control nothing. Everything that's yours is actually mine. Your pin money, your belongings, even the clothes on your back, all technically my property. I know that. That's how marriage works. It's how it's structured, but it doesn't have to be how we operate. He pulled papers from his jacket. I've had documents drawn up. They transfer property to your name specifically. Income that's yours alone. Legal standing that doesn't disappear if I die or if we... He stopped. If we what? If we can't make this work. If you decide you'd rather be apart than together, these documents give you options. Alira stared at the papers. You're giving me an escape route. I'm giving you autonomy. I'm giving you the power to choose to stay instead of being trapped here by law and economics. Most men would never do this. Most men didn't waste 7 years of their wife's life. Consider it a very inadequate apology. She took the papers, scanning legal language that essentially gave her independence within their marriage. Property, income, legal rights typically reserved for widows or unmarried women. "This is extraordinary," she said. "It's overdue. You should have had power from the beginning. I kept you powerless and wondered why you seemed so defeated. I could leave. With these, I could actually leave." "Yes. And you're giving them to me anyway. I'm giving you a choice. If you stay, I want it to be because you choose to, not because you have no alternative." Alira's eyes burned. This gift was more intimate than any kiss, more meaningful than any declaration. He was handing her freedom and trusting her not to use it against him. "What if I do leave?" she asked. "Then you leave, and I'll live with knowing I failed so thoroughly that freedom was more appealing than trying. That's not fair to you." "It's completely fair. Actions have consequences. Mine were catastrophic. I don't get to trap you in them indefinitely." She set down the papers, her hands shaking. "I don't want to leave." "You don't have to decide now. Keep the documents. Think about what you want. Take all the time you need." "I'm still angry at you." "I know. And I don't trust this yet. Don't trust that you won't retreat again." "I know that too. But I don't want to leave. I want—" She stopped, the words catching. "I want to see if we can actually become real. If we can be more than what we've been." "So do I." They sat in silence, the papers between them like a promise and a threat. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and persistent. "Stay with me tonight," Alira said quietly. "Actually stay. Not just until morning, but really stay." Dorian's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm choosing it anyway." They went upstairs together, no longer hiding, past Lucien, who grinned knowingly, past servants who carefully didn't notice, to Alira's room, where they'd spent the previous night barely touching. Tonight was different. Tonight they undressed with Martha's help, neither self-conscious about the intimacy. Tonight they climbed into bed together, no barrier of covers between them. Tonight they held each other like people who were choosing connection despite fear. "I don't know how to do this," Dorian whispered against her hair. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out. I'll probably retreat sometimes. Old habits. And I'll probably push you away when I'm scared. So we'll be a disaster. A honest disaster. Better than a perfect lie." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Alira dreamed, she dreamed of thawing, ice breaking, water flowing, things coming back to life after a killing frost. She woke to Dorian already awake again, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "You said my name," he said softly. "In your sleep, the way you did before." "What way?" "Like it mattered, like I mattered." "You do matter. That's the problem. If you didn't, this would be easier." "Would you rather it be easier?" She thought about it honestly. "No, I'd rather it be real." They spent Christmas Eve quietly, the three of them, no guests, no performance. They decorated a tree in the drawing room, arguing about ornament placement with the casualness of actual family. They drank too much mulled wine and laughed at Lucien's terrible stories from his travels. They existed without agenda or audience. That night, Alira and Dorian made love for the first time in their 7-year marriage. Not perfectly. Not like novels described, awkwardly, uncertainly, with stops and starts and nervous laughter. But real. Undeniably, messily real. Afterward, lying in the dark, Dorian spoke quietly. "I love you. I don't know when it started. Maybe the wedding day, maybe yesterday, maybe it's been there all along, hidden under fear. But I love you. And I'm sorry it took me 7 years to say it." Alira's breath caught. She wanted to say it back, wanted to offer that gift, but the words stuck. "I'm not there yet," she admitted. "I care about you. I want this to work. But love, I'm not sure I know what that is anymore." "That's fair. I can wait." "What if you wait and I never get there?" "Then you never get there. I'll love you anyway." The acceptance, the lack of pressure, the willingness to give without demanding return, it undid something in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the first shoots of it, breaking through frozen ground. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. "I will. And in 6 months after that. And 6 months after that. Until you either say it back or tell me to stop asking. That's a long commitment. I'm good at long commitments, just bad at the right kind until now. They fell asleep again, and Elira realized with surprise that she felt safe. After 7 years of sleeping alone, after nights of crying herself to exhaustion, after all the accumulated loneliness, she felt safe. It wasn't fixed, wasn't perfect, but it was something. Christmas morning brought snow and sunshine in equal measure. They attended church in the village, the three of them plus Martha, who Elira insisted come as family rather than servant. People stared, whispered. The Duke and Duchess together, actually sitting beside each other, actually touching. Let them stare. Let them wonder. Elira was done performing for anyone's comfort but her own. They returned to a quiet house and a simple meal. Exchanged small gifts, books, gloves, nothing extravagant. Lucien gave Dorian a bottle of extraordinarily expensive scotch. Dorian gave Lucien a set of traveling journals. Elira gave them both scarves she'd knitted badly, and they wore them anyway. In the evening, as they sat by the fire, Lucien announced he'd be leaving in the new year. "Where will you go?" Dorian asked. "Everywhere? Nowhere. I'll figure it out as I go." He looked between them. "But I'll come back, if that's all right." "Always," Elira said. "Your family. Even though I'm insufferable?" "Especially because you're insufferable. You woke us up. We needed that." After Lucien retired, Dorian and Elira stayed by the fire, content in the silence. "What do we do now?" Elira asked. "Live. Actually live instead of just existing." "It won't be easy." "No. We'll fight. We'll hurt each other. We'll have days where we hate this and each other." Encouraging. "But we'll also have days like today. Days where it feels possible. And maybe eventually, the possible days will outnumber the impossible ones." "You're optimistic." "I'm determined. There's a difference." Elira leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. They sat watching firelight dance, not talking, just being. The months that followed weren't easy. They fought, loudly, messily, saying things they regretted. Dorian did retreat sometimes, falling into old patterns of distance when emotions got too intense. Elira pushed him away sometimes, her anger flaring when he failed to meet expectations she hadn't voiced. But they kept trying, kept choosing each other even when it was hard, kept showing up even when showing up felt impossible. Slowly the house changed, doors opened, literally and emotionally. The oppressive silence gave way to conversation, to laughter, to arguments that ended in resolution instead of frozen withdrawal. Staff noticed. The village noticed. Eventually, London noticed. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford had become real people instead of marble statues. The scandal was delicious, the gossip endless. They didn't care. 6 months after Christmas, Dorian asked if she loved him yet. "I don't know," Elira admitted. "I care about you. I want you. I choose you every day." "If that's love, then yes. If love requires certainty, then not yet." "I'll take I choose you. That's better than love anyway." "How is it better?" "Because love can be passive, a feeling that happens to you. But choosing is active, intentional. You choose me despite my failures. That matters more than emotion." 6 months later, he asked again. "Yes," she said. "I love you." Messily, imperfectly, with reservations and fear and lingering anger, but yes. That's the best yes I've ever heard. They never became perfect. Their marriage remained complicated, requiring work and attention and constant choice. But it was real, built on honesty instead of performance, on vulnerability instead of walls. Years later, when people asked Elira what saved her marriage, she never said love. She said truth. Said that they stopped pretending and started being real, even when real was ugly. Said that they chose each other every day, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Because that was the lesson, in the end. Not that love conquers all, or that forgiveness erases harm, or that trying hard enough guarantees success. The lesson was simpler and harder, that you can't build something real on foundations of pretending. That being seen, truly seen, flaws and all, matters more than being admired. That choosing each other is more powerful than feeling for each other. The greatest victory wasn't dramatic transformation. It was two broken people deciding that broken together was better than perfect apart. It was opening doors instead of building walls. It was saying, I see you, and I choose you, and I'm still here, over and over, until the words became truth. In a world that demanded perfection, they chose honesty. In a society that valued appearances, they chose substance. In a marriage that had been frozen solid, they chose to thaw, slowly, painfully, one deliberate choice at a time. And that choice, repeated daily for the rest of their lives, made all the difference. The house that had been a tomb became a home. The silence that had been suffocating became comfortable. And two people who'd been strangers for 7 years slowly, imperfectly, became partners. Not because they fixed everything, but because they stopped pretending everything needed to be fixed and started accepting that messy and real was good enough. That some things are worth the struggle. That you can survive your mistakes. That it's never too late to choose differently. And that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop being perfect and start being human.